John Steers, who was a special effects head, was very good. There was no problem with his work, but he was too full of himself. He was always promising the Earth, and they had to make a radio-controlled, three-legged version of R2-D2, which he kept saying is going to be work, it's going to be great, it'll work and everything. And about 4 weeks before I went off to Tunisia, I got called into John Barry's office with Les Dilly, the art director, and he said, listen, it's not going to work. So build a lightweight one out of fiberglass that you can pull on fishing wire, put it on the truck, don't tell anyone. First day of shooting in Tunisia is the droids being purchased by Uncle Owen. First shot is R2-D2, who came out, radio control, crashed, fell over, knocked another robot over, and John Steers had an excuse he'd used in London. He rushed in front of the crew and said, wow, it's the taxis, they're upsetting my radio. We were like 3 miles up a dusty desert road from a sleepy town where there was probably, most of the taxis were donkey carts or camels. So they said, can you get yours out? And from then on, nearly every shot of R2-D2 in the desert is, we put a board down, put sand on the edge of it, and we pull them on fishing wire. In fact, if you watch the scene, which is all about R2-D2, because C-3PO, the head blows on the one they purchased and he persuades them to take R2-D2. If you watch, he's not that much in it. George had to use whatever segments he could get before he fell over, or had to keep us out pulling him and things like that. I tell these stories because that's really how Star Wars was made. The whole thing was like that. The director of photography watched on the first few shots. George was lining up with a viewfinder because he's an independent filmmaker, and he marched over to him and said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm lining up the shots. He said, you go and work with the actors, look after the actors, I do all of that. And from that moment on, Gary Kurtz had to mediate between the two of them. There was very little dialogue. And he would never come and, with the art department, he would never come and look at the sets, which is vital because you need to know how the lighting is. And he would always go on and you know, when we got back to the studio, in fact, the Death Star, the big conference room, which is the first major scene in the Death Star, he stormed off the set and said, I can't light this, and went up to the producer's office. So John Barry went down and started lighting it. And the word went up to Gil Taylor saying, they're lighting your set. And he stormed down. It was like that for, and that's why George to this day says there were only 5 people stuck by his side to actually get Star Wars made, and I was one with John Barry. And I don't say it to be out of pride or ego or anything. It was just, I love this movie. I really like George. He never ever told me what to do. There was never one prop, one set, nothing where he ever said, this is how you do it. He just relied on my instinct to bring it, and everything I did. They asked me to show him the first set that John Barry built was the cockpit for the Millennium Falcon. And it's, you know, these stories, it's all to show how this was actually a revolution in cinema. It changed cinema, as we know, and it changed science fiction cinema. So John Barry, well, he and George showed the crew to try to get them to understand Once Upon a Time in the West, which is Sergio Leone's classic, which completely floored them because no one could understand we're doing a science fiction movie. He showed them 2001, which they did understand. And he showed them Satyricon by Fellini, which I understood. It had age sets and a massive scale, completely confused the rest of the crew. But in trying to kind of get everybody to understand they never did. Even Les Dilly, in the even interviews afterwards, he said, now, you know, we had this script, we didn't know what on earth was going on. None of us understood it. We thought it was a children's film. The only saving grace is British crews, when they took the job, they worked. They would just do it, and they got on with it. So it kind of survived, but it was war with very little money. You know, and poor George, I felt so bad for him. There were union rules in those days, and you finished at 5:30. If you were doing a shot before the end, by 5:15, you could say, can I call a quarter? And they'd give you an extra. Gil Taylor was the union boss. They refused George every time to carry on. So often we would finish the day halfway through a set, which completely messed our art department up, because we relied on him finishing, and you pull that set down and put another one, because you know, we had to be economic with stages and costs and everything. But for me, it was just, I loved every day of it, and so did John Barry. He huge help to George to get this film made. John was incredibly smart, and you know, he'd done Clockwork Orange for Stanley Kubrick. So, and the two, Norman Reynolds and Les Dilly, just stuck with us. They were there to get stuff made somehow, and in fact, Norman took on C-3PO and had to invent new joints, how to do it. He got him to work, but the first day of shooting with the robots, it was the first time ever that C-3PO put on that full suit. We were so tight on time, and the leg shattered. He had a silver one, which he has to this day. People didn't notice on the first one, but he always had an odd leg. And then gold tape was stuck around. Darth Vader had to have black gaffer tape round to hold it together. It's funny, because I was at the ranch and George was digitizing the 6 movies to do a release of them all, and he said, come and look at this, and he was doing that point, the first one, and he said, you can see now when it's digitized, you can see the tape. He had to redo digitally almost 60% of each of those movies to get rid of it, because it never noticed on film, and there was a very tiny kind of same filter that Sergio Leone used on the lens. You know, there's, I don't know, destiny strikes very often. I was in John Barry's office. He'd asked me to bring some plumbing parts because he was trying to draw up a set. So I had a U-bend in my hand, and the phone rang, and then he put the phone down and he said, George has changed his mind. He needs the comlink right now, because I was bringing in props when they were needed. And as he said it, out of the corner of the U-bend, a filter dropped, boom, and it went in my hand. I went, oh, there's a comlink, look at that. Rushed to my office, I stuck one thing down, went to the floor, went in George's hand, he went, oh, great, and put it into the stormtrooper's hand. These are the stories of how this film was made, and I have to tell the stories, and I've written the book and I've done a documentary now, Galaxy Built on Hope, because it's a mentorship really for people of how you just got to stick to your guns and try to get things done if you believe in it. And because I'm the only one, because John Barry sadly died when he was working on Empire Strikes Back, I'm the only one who actually put all this world together, and it you know, things that we did on that have become the standard for the industry now. On anything you make, Avatar is still made with bits and pieces and sticking stuff together, the models, everything. And you know, we're in the 4th generation now of Star Wars, and kids now growing up are seeing big Hollywood movies. They're huge budgets, and the beginnings of this were a kind of ragtag group of a few cinema revolutionaries with no money, and World War II weapons and aeroplane junk and things like that. So it's a legacy, really, because there's never been anything like Star Wars, and there never will be again. The circumstances of how this came about at the time will never be allowed to happen again. So, you know, and the Skywalker, Luke Skywalker is the hero's journey, right? It should have been 1 to 9. It went 1 to 8, but I won't talk about that. It should have been 1 to 9, and that what George wrote was what everybody, it doesn't matter if you're male, female, whatever, that's your journey in life. It's the hero's journey that is really everybody's journey. So I take this on as an important role, and I'm now doing exhibitions and events and Star Wars events, doing this now because the last year and a half I've met more than 1,000 people, fans who come to these shows, and there isn't one single person who hasn't told me Star Wars changed my life. And I believe that George gave the planet something to believe in, which is like a myth. You know, every in history, every kind of nation, everything have their legends and myths. George created one for the cinema age, and I see families. George made this film for families. I see so many families coming, and it's not so easy now, you know, finding communication. The world is changing. And there's families who have united with this kind of saga that has taken on a role. I thought it would be successful, but it's gone way beyond that now. So I just feel it's my duty, because I'm the only one standing who can tell all these stories. And I think it's, you know, again, I wrote the book as a mentorship, and the last words in my book are, don't let anyone tell you you can't, you can. You know, and it's something that I feel, and I noticed this the other day and I started talking about it, you know, most now people will go to the toy shop and buy toys of Star Wars. There are so many fans in the world now who go out, find the bits that I made or mock them up. They're making weapons, they're making lightsabers, they're making all models. They're all probably doing things they never knew they had a talent for, but Star Wars has given them an opportunity and a reason to do it. So all of these things together, you know, this is special.